You've probably heard the word Gentile thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean? It's a term that started off as a pretty simple label, really just for everyone else. But over time, it came to represent one of the deepest divides in human history. So today, we're going to unpack its origin and see how it was completely transformed.
So let's get right to it. Who were the Gentiles? Now, on the surface, the answer seems pretty simple, but that simple definition is actually the beginning of an incredible story, one filled with profound division, ancient prophecy, and in the end, a really radical new kind of unity.
Okay, so at its most basic level, the definition is super straightforward. A Gentile is just anyone who isn't Jewish. The original words in Hebrew and Greek, that's goyim and ethne, they simply meant nations or peoples. It was basically a way of sorting the world into two main groups, the Jewish people and, well, everybody else.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just some neutral dictionary-style label. Oh no. In the ancient world, this distinction created a huge us versus them dynamic. It was like a line drawn in the sand separating one specific group from all the other nations on Earth.
And wow, this really shows you just how stark that contrast was. From the Jewish perspective at the time, they were the people of God, while Gentiles were seen as pagans. They were clean. Gentiles were unclean. Sometimes they'd even use really harsh derogatory terms like dogs. We're not talking about a small disagreement here. This was a massive social and religious chasm.
And this wasn't just a bad attitude, This division was actually formalized in day-to-day life. This quote from the book of Acts shows you just how serious it was. It is against our law for a Jew to associate with or visit a Gentile. So this barrier wasn't some abstract idea, it was a real thing, woven right into the fabric of their society. But what if that massive wall wasn't meant to be permanent? See, ancient prophecies actually hinted that this division wasn't going to last forever. A huge turning point was coming, a fundamental shift that was going to be centered around the figure of the Messiah. I mean, check this out. We're talking hundreds of years before Jesus was even born. And the prophet Isaiah wrote that the Messiah would be a light to the Gentiles. Now that is a huge deal. It tells us that including all the other nations wasn't some kind of plan B. It seems it was always part of the plan for the Messiah's work to reach far beyond just the Jewish people.
And then when you look at Jesus' life, you can really see this prophecy starting to play out. For instance, he helped a Gentile woman, which was pretty much unheard of for a Jewish teacher back then. And think about his death. It involved both groups, right? He was arrested by Jewish leaders, but then he was sentenced and executed by Roman Gentiles. You can see those hard lines already starting to get a little fuzzy.
Okay, so after Jesus, that little bit of blurring, it completely explodes. It turns into this full-blown movement where the message of the gospel starts leaping across that divide that everyone thought was totally uncrossable, spreading from its Jewish roots into the much wider Gentile world. And you can see the chain reaction right here. The same event surrounding Jesus' death, which involved both Jews and Gentiles, actually created the perfect conditions for the message to spread. The apostles started taking this message out into the world and, get this, to the shock of many, Gentiles actually started to believe it. The message really began to take root in places no one expected. And you can just feel the astonishment in this reaction from the early Jewish Christians. So then, even to Gentiles, you can almost hear the disbelief in their voices. It was a total revelation. The idea that God's plan of salvation was truly for everyone, well, that was a radical concept that they were just beginning to wrap their heads around. So all of this leads us to the final, and honestly, the most profound conclusion in this whole story. It wasn't just about including Gentiles, it was about creating something entirely new, a single, unified community where all those old divisions just didn't have any power anymore. Yeah, the early Christian writers talked about this as God taking two totally separate lumps of clay, Jew and Gentile, and molding them together into one new thing. All those old categories that had defined human history for centuries were being replaced by one new identity. And this idea is just captured perfectly right here. The Apostle Paul writes that Christ himself became the peace between these two groups, destroying what he calls the dividing wall of hostility. That ancient barrier, the one that seemed so permanent, theologically, it was torn down, gone. All right, so let's quickly recap the incredible journey of this one word. Gentile starts out as a simple term for a non-Jew, but it came to represent a deep and often hostile divide. But then the central claim of Christianity is that this massive barrier was torn down, creating one new unified community from two very separate groups.
And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? This whole story is about breaking down a wall that seemed insurmountable. So the question for us is, how does understanding these ancient divisions help us recognize and maybe even address the barriers, whether they're social, cultural, or something else, that exist in our own world today?